Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I am talking about the new album from Isotope under the Tritium alias H3. So I guess it's self-titled, sort of, but... Okay, whatever. Okay, before I begin this review, I think I should discuss Bandcamp and obscure artists for a bit. I get requests from people all the time to check out their album and review it. Generally speaking, if I'm going to review someone in my comments or DMs who I've never heard of, that either means A, it's someone I have a personal history with, so technically I have heard of them, so that doesn't even really apply. Or B, it's someone I just randomly heard on a whim and was genuinely blown away by, which has yet to actually happen. And there are a few other reasons for that, one of which is that I just don't like calling attention to people whose music isn't that good to me. I don't want to give out bad publicity, but the main thing is just that even if I do like these releases, I often have little to nothing to say. And certainly not enough to fill a full video review. Some of these I'd be done talking about within like 2 minutes at most. That's why I prefer people with a personal history, because I'm more familiar with their style. Talking about them will come more naturally, and having a back catalog is a bonus as well, because then I get to do like a brief segment or talk about their recent work, as seen on my reviews of Opus 84 stuff. So yeah, that's why I decided to cover Isotope today, an obscure Bandcamp artist who you may or may not already know through either comments on my videos or through this IDM Discord chats that I keep hearing about, that has this guy and Opus in it, I think. And I've been thinking about checking out that Discord chat at some point. I don't know how to use Discord though, so like, I don't know when that exactly is going to happen. But whatever, I'd known Isotope for a while. I've been following Isotope on Twitter for a while, and for those of you who remember my review of Opus's Alpine album from the very beginning of this year, I gave Isotope a shout out for his second album, Symphony for Personal Computer, an album of which I enjoyed, but as I mentioned, did not have enough material for a full video. But that being said, now this guy's got a pretty substantial back catalog. I haven't heard everything, but I think I've heard all his stuff as Isotope, so like the first 2 rows on his Bandcamp page currently, and his appearances on Opus's first 2 Discord compilations. Still gotta listen to the third one of those, but I digress. Allow me to go down his discography so far. Maybe not the most impressive of albums, but it does sort of have a unique sound. Maybe inspired by Aphex Twin's I Care Because You Do? Not exactly fantastic, but not bad either. There's some pretty cool stuff here. Reminds me of Metamatics a little bit in some areas, actually. But also selected ambient works in others, because of course. Still worth checking out, though. Same as the previous, but maybe a bit darker. Again, pretty cool. These 2 EPs would work pretty well in the same package, I think. This is like this multi-part track that seems to borrow off his track Knifscher, or maybe vice versa since that came afterwards, but whatever. Good track though. This is supposedly a prelude to Symphony for Personal Computer, got kind of that sort of Audiker and Cannabula sort of vibe, albeit a bit more abstract. Not bad. Okay, so he's definitely established his sound by this point, similar to Audiker in its abstractness and style, but still kind of its own thing. Doesn't actually sound like a rip-off or anything like that. Pretty good overall, worth checking out. Okay, this one wasn't so much its own thing. Coming dangerously close to Audiker rip-off in some parts. Taking a lot of influence from Try Repeat A and Draft 7.30, I think. There were some more interesting moments like the synth strings on track 4, and the last one which reminds me of Future Loop Foundation a little bit, but... So, you know, those are a thing, but wasn't quite as impressed with this one, to be perfectly honest. Which brings us to here. So, going into this latest album, there were a few things that piqued my interest. First of all, this album was not under his main Isotope alias, but rather Tritium. Although he did seem to be treating it like a mainline album, and after all, I mean, Tritium is like 3rd Isotope. And another thing that stuck out to me was the tags in the bottom of the Bandcamp page, which previously said stuff like IDM, glitch, downtempo, abstract, that kind of stuff. But here there was also sample-based and Boards of Canada in the tags. That definitely intrigued me. Would definitely be interesting to see how he'd work in Boards of Canada into his usual IDM style. I was a little worried it'd be a bit too much of a homage to them, since their sound is very difficult to replicate and make original. But I jumped in regardless, and how did it turn out? Well, I will say this one gave me no shortage of things to discuss, that's for sure. I'm going to first have to address the elephant in the room that is the first track on this album, mbntndng, and while it seemed like a cool intro at first, with this radio tuning and all that, as the track went on, I was completely blindsided by the presence of my own voice. Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky. Yes, Isotope sampled me saying, hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, and made like sort of a audio YTP of it or something. On first listen of this album, this was hilarious, but it threw me off so much, I basically couldn't pay attention to the remainder of the album. On top of that, later realizing the track name wasn't as gibberish as it looked and could be pronounced Wonky really threw me for a loop there, and even it is still pretty distracting, because I cannot take it seriously, and that's a problem because this album does not strike me as a joke whatsoever. I mean, Isotope has made music that isn't exactly meant to be taken seriously in the past. Ask him about Poizake the Great, or DLD 493V2, the album, the movie, the experience. But no, this one sounds like he actually did put in serious time and effort into it, and he was like, you know, actually trying for something new here. Now, I think from a stylistic standpoint, this album, kind of ups the ante from Symphony for Personal Computer. That album reminded me of Outtaker, sure, but that could mean any variety of things, and I was unable to pin down any particular era of their career it reminded me of, just kind of took influence from all of it. And like I said, this album here, like, mentioned Boards of Canada and the Tags as his main obvious influence, but honestly, if you hadn't told me BOC were an influence, I'd have taken a pretty long time to figure it out myself. I guess after several listens, I am definitely starting to get sort of Boards of Canada vibe out of it, but it doesn't really sound like anything they've ever done. At first, really the only thing I could make even a remote connection to was like the old tapes compilations. But that was like the best I could think of. I think this album like takes some elements from BOC and maybe some elements from Outtaker as well, though not as much. But I think overall it achieves its own unique sound that I can't really directly link to any other artist. This album, it really is just its own thing. And I have to say, major props for that. This is definitely a highly interesting album with a lot of cool moments on it. Probably my favorite track on here is like right there at the beginning. Not the one with me on it, but the one right after it. Ind0.84. This is a really cool track. Taking these repetitive loops of like Indian tabla and adding in what sounds like jungle sound effects, maybe with some sort of filter on it to make it sound synthetic. Or vice versa, maybe it's synthetic and made to sound like real birds, but it doesn't sound quite close, and there's like also an ambient pad that weirdly reminds me of like Thump Monks, the people behind the Submachine soundtrack. And it's weird because they usually go into super dark, creepy, and atonal territory, but this is more like their take on 8592. This track is better every time I hear it, really nice. And then after that, the track, there's one called ADC D33 PSC, which in retrospect seems pretty clearly based off of the track Dandelion from GeoGaddy, but I'll admit, it took me a while to make the connection. The voice samples sound like some kind of nature documentary narrated by, like, Tom Scott, modulated to sound like a 60-year-old or something. I don't know if that's actually him. And the synth melodies are a lot darker and more atonal and abstract. But yeah, then LECIWN 3-hop probably has the most obvious BOC influence in the melodies. Like there's some sort of bell sound that shows up like halfway through the track that definitely gives off that kind of BOC vibe. But the percussion track doesn't sound like BOC at all. It sounds more like something, I don't know, like if you were to make a newly remastered Black Dog Spanners, best I could think of. It's like really tight and like obviously MIDI automated. Feels like it has some of those weird clicky stock percussion that comes with MIDI and all that, but it doesn't feel out of place either, and it's also like super upfront in the mix. And that's another thing I have to address in this album. The percussion is always at the front of the mix in most of these tracks. It almost sounds like it's the focus in many areas. And, you know, BOC have never been about the percussion tracks, so that's, you know, certainly something. To be honest though, I think maybe it would have been better for the album had the percussion been mixed lower. Because there's a couple of these tracks that have a lot of cool atmospheric details that I didn't pick up on because they were too low in the mix. This one probably the biggest example, but we got what we got. And this is still one of the better tracks to be sure. The beat also has what sounds like some like turntable scratching on it, which I guess is meant to call over to BOC tracks like 6010. Well, mainly that one in particular. But anyway, UI381Z Edit has some cool eerie textures in the background, and don't have a lot to say about that one. Then there's NEJ3 Snau3. Why am I even bothering? I like this one because it's got like some good bass lines, and it's got like this one very faint, cheery little synth melody that does sort of remind me of 808 State, kind of, sort of. And Kyun 2 has an interesting percussion track that has an interestingly acoustic texture to it, probably mainly thanks to that one cymbal sound. And it also has like this crazy breakdown in the middle that's pretty cool too. R6 Select is a really short and minimalistic track that just lets the melody do the work. And I kind of wish the album had more of this kind of stuff. It's really the only one of its kind. Though by the same token, these kind of tracks are just like BOC's bread and butter, but you know, still a good one. hydTyubb, meanwhile, probably has a much more upfront melody, and while it is pretty freeform, I think it is one of the overall more enjoyable ones as well. Kind of has like a sort of Audiker Incunabula feel to it overall. Also, I like the sample of the London Underground at the beginning. That's a nice touch. And the final track, PADLAY, is just a straight ambient pad with what sounds like some like Windows 7 default error sounds sprinkled throughout. It's another pretty minimalistic track, but a fitting closer as well. So, finally time for me to express my thoughts on this album overall. I gotta say, this album took me a lot of repeat listens for me to form even remotely coherent thoughts on it. And for quite a long time, I just like listened through it and it just almost seemed to go in one ear and out the other. I knew what I was hearing was going to have no shortage of discussion material, but the words to describe what I was hearing just like would not come together. But when I really sat down with it and turned the volume up pretty high so that I could hear all the fine details, then it finally clicked with me, and I was able to discuss it. Now, I do have my issues with this album, and it comes twofold. First, as I mentioned, is the mixing. This album has really spot-on attention to detail that I didn't even remotely pick up on until I, turned it up pretty loud. Like, there really is a lot of complicated editing and glitching going on, and a lot of other cool textures in it, but like, it's almost kind of drowned out by the percussion. It's kind of like if you saw like a TV with some cool trippy visuals on a screen far away, but then like you couldn't get up close enough because there was like a chain link fence that you had to press your face up against in order to see it. I mean, it'd be uncomfortable, but it, you know, wouldn't be worth the experience, I think. And I realize that is a weird freaking metaphor, but whatever. Now, the other side of this criticism is that this off-balance mixing is part of what gives this album such a unique sound. And I did see a lot more of the Borzicanda influences when I could hear all of it up close. So, I don't think this is a super pressing matter that requires going in to remaster and re-upload stuff like Opus 84 did when I pointed out he accidentally mixed one synth melody way too high on his most recent album. So, okay, I can get over the mixing. It's not like he makes things impossible to hear, but I think maybe a bigger problem is that I don't think Isotope is just the best with melodies. I think he has some here and there that work, like, I think a whole bunch of the ones on the ambivalent to ambient CPs worked pretty well, but I'll admit most of his melodies just don't stick with me, and I think that's mainly because a lot of them are really freeform and abstract, and don't form any sort of, like, recognizable patterns or anything. Mind you, there are multiple Outtaker albums that I think also have this problem, and on top of that, they've never been about that kind of thing, so I don't know. I mean, Boards of Canada are usually fantastic in this department, so I was hoping a little more of that, but if melodies are not the point, then that's not the point, and that's fine. And as I mentioned before, this is also an album in which I am constantly skipping the first track. I get the feeling if my voice were not there, it would have been made for a much less jarring intro, but that's just me because it's my voice. Maybe for other people, this won't be so much of a problem. I just personally can't take it seriously and it wrecks the flow of the album, but that's just me. So I guess all in all, yeah, this album's worth your time. While I will have to admit, melodically it's on the forgettable side, and, you know, that's something important to me, but I have to give credit where credit is due and say that in terms of, like, attention to detail and forming a unique sound, this is definitely some really cool stuff, and I'm glad I spent as much time as I did, like, analyzing and breaking it down, so check this out. I'm overall feeling a 7.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.